This is Chris Joslyn again, welcoming you to another edition of the Chris Joslyn Show, brought to you by CJ Solutions Group, www.cjgrp.com. Get in contact with a consultant today to talk to them about whatever is ailing you in your business in the transportation industry. They're versed in a lot of different subjects and can do a free consultation to help you with those challenges. They are a solutions provider. Go to www.cjgrp.com. Get your consultant today. Today we are also joined by a fantastic guest. His name is Caleb Nelson. He is the Chief Growth Officer of a company called Sifted, a wonderful data analytics company. And we're going to draw out some questions today and get some of his background and see what that company is about and where he feels the transportation industry, especially the final mile and the LTL industry, is looking to gain ground with the ever-expanding e-commerce section of our economy and what he sees in the future with how to analyze and become more efficient as a transportation company. So without further ado, let's welcome Caleb Nelson. Well, I welcome you very much, Caleb, to this edition of the Chris Joslyn Show. You are the Chief Growth Officer of Sifted. Now, is it sifted.com or is it just Sifted?
It's sifted.com for our website. We make it really simple for people to check us out.
Yeah, I can tell you there's always something in a name for me. And I like the name Sifted because it kind of brings up some visuals of kind of how there's just a mass of data and information, and all these companies are into analytics these days, and somebody has got to be out there sifting through all this stuff to try to put it into something that people in different segments of the transportation industry can actually visually see what's going on and make some decisions based on it, right?
Yeah, that's you nailed it. I mean, there's a specific reason why we're called Sifted. There is so much data in transportation. Transportation is next to banking in its size and scope and complexity of data. So if you take like one, even just parcel shipment with FedEx or UPS, you've got, if you look at it in like an Excel spreadsheet, it's up to 60 plus columns left to right, and a single shipment is up to 7 rows. So if you are shipping even a couple thousand or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of shipments, you look at that in an Excel spreadsheet and it's so much data, it crashes Excel.
Yeah. And I years and years ago, I was with a large intermodal marketing company. That's when I started in the business. I'm not even tell you how long ago that was because I think you were like 2. But I remember when they got into data warehousing for the first time, and I was all excited. I was like, "Hey, we've got offices all over the country, and now we've got the data on what's happening all over the country. We can use that to try to get more efficient." The unfortunate part is most people, including myself, didn't understand how to use that data or even analyze that data. And of course, today is a different world, right?
Yeah. It's one of those things that usually organizations are doing 2 things. They're not looking at the data, and they know they should. Like they have this gut sinking feeling inside of like, hey, we're missing opportunity because we're not looking at the data. Or the second part is they're looking at the data, but they're spending hours upon hours just massaging that data just to get it to a spot where they can find improvement. And it's a full-time job. Like most larger organizations have a data analytic team to go through that data. There's just a lot of power in it.
Right.
And so that's why people will invest that time and energy to go find some of those golden nuggets that are really hidden in that data.
I have never watched this movie. I've heard about this movie Moneyball, but what you're talking about reminds me of how the sports industry has gone.
Yeah.
Data analytics. And actually one of my nephews is involved in that with a different sports team. And I was amazed because I was like, okay, are they hiring my nephew to do like a one-man show? No, this one team has 20 people doing nothing but analyzing the stuff, to your point. And now hopefully it's not on spreadsheets,
Yeah, honestly, I think there's a whole issue of seeing the data. Usually the people that understand those spreadsheets are the individuals who put them together and nobody else. And they're all proud of it because they spent like 12 hours in this spreadsheet that nobody else gets.
Guilty.
And part of it is, and I am too. We use Excel every day. And, you are proud of sometimes that immense amount of work that it takes to get that data in a spot. But nobody else went through that with you. typically. And so sharing it, you have to be the one that deciphers it. You're the only one who really gets it. So visualizing that data and simplifying that data is, I would say, 80% of it.
See, you just did the raise the eyebrow thing, which is like, here's a key point that no one should miss if they're watching or listening to this, because,
Yeah.
visualizing
Yeah.
is one thing, but actually turning it into action is kind of, in my vision, the
Yeah.
most important thing. The data is
Yep.
so wide and so deep that you got to sift your way through all this stuff. And I mean, that's what your company is really all about. Now, I would imagine, I've gone through some of the different things that you guys put together, and it seems like most of your focus is on the high data LTL package kind of environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, we specialize in the complexities of parcel, so FedEx, UPS, regional carriers, even USPS, to LTL companies around the country. The way in which the data is situated and in different languages from different carriers, because there's not a single universal. You take one shipment from FedEx and put it to UPS language, and it's totally different. They call different fees, different names. So cleaning that up and getting it in a good spot, the complexities of it are large on the parcel side. And if anybody is listening and they ship FedEx and UPS and you've looked at your bills, you understand the certain level of complexity that's in there. FedEx and UPS inundate you with data and tend to overcomplicate it for you, because there are really golden nuggets hidden in that data, like we mentioned, that they may or may not want you to really identify and make corrective action on.
So it sounds to me like it's quasi purposeful to just do an entire data dump and let somebody sift through that themselves and try to figure it out. And like most human beings, we kind of look at this stuff and just go, okay, they're right. We're going to trust it. Move on,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
it sounds to me like your service and your programming, if you will, is almost a part of one of the links in the supply chain, right? You're attaching other links that aren't communicating together properly. I've always wondered why. No, I shouldn't wonder why. I know why. Companies start and do their own thing and create their own platforms for their own reasons, but there is no real defined harmonics between companies. I mean, you can talk about international shipping, and there's some of that stuff going on so that we can speak the same language with, weight classifications and things like that. But in terms of talking to one another on platforms, it's entirely missing still. And it's been missing for my entire career.
I know. I've been in transportation for 20 years, and it's one of those things that is, you see the data siloed. That's what we call it, where it's just separated out and nothing's really communicating together. There's overlap. There's overlap between parcel, packaging, shipping to LTL shipping. There is overlap between LTL and full truckload. There is overlap between what's in the shopping cart if you're an e-commerce company to what gets delivered to your client and that customer experience. And there are data points all along it that if you look at it separately, you're not going to get the full picture. And identifying and really, I would say, visualizing that data to make that corrective action is what separates those top companies from the rest in the
I think
market.
that's one of the things that captured my attention about your company initially is, one of your people sent me some, there was a couple of graphs, a couple of charts, a couple of, colorful pie, charts and things like that. And I'm like, I don't know what the statistics are, but I would venture to say that way much the lion's share of people are visual people, and that we learn visually, et cetera. And I think it allows us to make decisions more quickly and effectively when we see things versus try to hear them properly or get involved in some other way. So the visual aspect of this is what caught my attention. So from a service aspect, when somebody goes to sifted.com and says, "Hey, I want to engage with you guys," and I'm a last mile guy. I set up the last mile for these package deliveries to people's homes, probably through a USPS or some like service, or nowadays, who knows? Maybe it's some of the gig economy people delivering in their cars, like, Uber Eats kind of people or whatever. So
Yep.
How would they go about engaging with your company and utilizing the tools you have to offer?
That's a great question. The question I get asked the most from individuals is like, hey, those visuals look great. How do I see my data in your platform? A lot of companies think this is a difficult process and I'm going to have to involve IT and get resources kind of dedicated for it. We make it super simple. We call it 30 seconds easy. We send a secure link where you can log into your UPS.com account, FedEx.com account, USPS.com account, Indicia, even LTL carriers. You log into that using our secure link, and our system does it automatically. It pulls down a year's worth of UPS data. If you're a FedEx customer, it's 6 months worth of historical data, visualizes it, and does it all automatically so that you don't have to worry about it. And then we jump on the phone and say, this is what it looks like. But more importantly, this is what the story is that your data is telling you. Everybody's data set tells a different story. You might have a bad contract. You might have bad price. You might have bad fees. You might have self-inflicted pain that you're causing on yourself that you might not know of. There's a whole slew of self-inflicted issues that can take place that's hidden in that data. And you might not even be aware of it because it's hidden on a 156-page invoice from FedEx or UPS.
I think you hit an interesting mark because I don't know a single transportation company I've dealt with in my 3+ decades that hasn't done a lot of self-infliction with a lot of pain.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to mend those wounds at all. And it sounds to me like you're offering probably this initial engagement with people when they do a data dump like that. You have some canned visual dashboards that kind of give them a flow of things. And then it's probably stage 2 or level 2 is let's dig into your data to, conform to what your KPIs are, what your key performance indicators are, et cetera. I'm assuming, correct?
Oh, yeah, 100%. So it's that kind of initial, hey, let's get a baseline. And how we baseline it is we score it. So Sifted is really one of the largest collectors of transportation data in the industry. We collect more transportation data than just about any other group out there, minus the carriers themselves. And what that allows us to do is score an individual shipper to other shippers that are similar in size to them, their peer group, and let them know, hey, look, your score, kind of like a credit score, your score is here, your group is here, and this is specifically where it's off by. I think a lot of people know and have a gut feeling that they might have room for improvement, but they might not know where that is. They might think, oh, well, maybe it's on the operations side of, if I reduce box sizes or if I ship more effectively with the right carrier, or maybe it's in my contract. The challenging part is if you try to work with your partner carrier rep, your representative from FedEx or UPS, or even some of these LTL carriers, they're going to tell you, hey, you have the best rates. I mean, what else are they going to tell you? Right?
Of course.
So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, hey, help me improve. Where can I improve? And they're going to say, you're doing great. You've got the best rates on this side of the Mississippi, man.
Just ship more, more.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's interesting because you're saying get a kind of a credit score, if you will, if you want to analogize it with something. But I would imagine there's different components of that, right? Maybe 5 subcategories that you normally look at. You've mentioned contracts many times. And I know back many years ago, I could walk in, LTL was not my core competency. It was more the intermodal side of things, the railroad side of things in full truckload brokerage. But I had my hand in some LTL. And one of the things I noticed is the disparate nature of how many LTL companies there are. Unless you knew your geography well as a transportation manager for a company, inevitably you weren't selecting all the best carriers for the lanes you were shipping in. So I could almost always walk in and say, hey, I can save you 10% with it. I almost always could say something like that. I mean, I never said it like that, but I would go in with that kind of thing in my mind. And I was I was always right about it too. So what you guys do is you go to those customers, and it sounds like you're giving them not only a dashboard for their own internal kind of view to give them a sight on their own data, but a more encompassing or umbrella point of view of where they're sitting in the industry in certain aspects. And that's powerful.
Yeah, that's right. And it answers that kind of age-old question of, am I doing things right? When you're an individual shipper, you only have access to your data. You don't have access to anybody else's, let alone, billions of dollars worth of data. And when you can add some smart technology on top of that large data set, there are some really insightful things that can, come to light. We call it, let's fish where the fish are. You might be doing some things correctly, but other things might need to be improved. The beautiful part about the data is that it doesn't lie. It's not egotistical. It doesn't have a career on the line. You're not, getting a commission from the data is not making a commission on an account like a sales rep would be. There is a very kind of black and white, beautiful idea around data that when you looked in the correct way and you score it properly to others, can really provide you with a baseline health report of like, hey, that does need to be improved for the betterment of the organization. And then you can go improve it and then watch as it takes place and thrives. That's kind of the fun part.
Yeah, I often kind of tell people that when they're looking at their internal metrics, their internal data, they're giving themselves a checkup. But there's a difference between giving yourself, putting a blood pressure cuff on and taking your own blood pressure, going to the doctor and seeing what your vital signs really are according to them, or getting blood drawn, et cetera. And there's a number of things that are not identifiable when you look at that person or that company from the outside. So you need to dig through that. And in a company like yourself, who's been around for what, 15 plus years now, around that?
Yeah, that's right.
So 15 years
correct.
of gathering data, you kind of understand where people's or companies' blood pressure needs to be, where their cholesterol level really is, et cetera, like that. And I think that's really an important aspect, and something, especially I deal with a lot of younger people coming into the industry now, and they are full of the desire to look at the data and understand the technologies. And there's an application there. And I always tell them that that's very important, but they also need to understand these are humans they're interfacing with, at least for now, because AI is changing a lot of that. And I would imagine the next question I had for you is how Sifted is applying AI technology or an AI engine to what you have going on, or is that one of the steps in the process that's going to bring you to the next level of what you do?
Yeah, I think kind of the dirty little secret within software organizations is AI is overused. There's very few programs that are like specific AI. A lot of them offer machine learning. And that ML technology is that, AI is, you don't have to tell it what to do or what to look for. It is automatically adjusting and identifying what needs to be done and then providing some solutions. Most software programs are not quite there yet, but machine learning, where it is just point me in the right direction and let me solve some of these problems and give me some baseline parameters. That machine learning is definitely part of Sifted and is going to continue to grow in our database. You've got a massive data lake within our group, and the more intelligent kind of machine learning technology you can add to that, the more valuable it's going to be for clients who use it.
That's an interesting way to put it. And I think maybe I probably misuse that nomenclature too much. Like a lot of people, you hear about AI.
I do all the time.
And I automatically kind of converge those two elements, and they're not. One has a layer of decision making by human beings that says these are the parameters we need for this, kind of direction we're going. And AI kind of does that all for you, supposedly, someday. I don't know if we've hit that tipping point.
Yeah.
And if we ever do hit that, what is it called? The singularity or whatever they talk about. If we ever hit that, we're not going to know it anyway. We're probably beyond it. And
at that point, it's Terminator 2 Skynet.
Yeah, well, style. There is a company called Skynet, but we won't go down that pathway with that's
transportation.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Who knows? But
to your point, though, I think that the human element is such a massive component to all of this. At the end of the day, you have organizations that are utilizing FedEx and UPS and LTL services and can have massive spend and massive budget of millions of dollars and have it be one person's job. If very few other organizations will give millions or tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars of budget to one or two individuals. So those individuals are oftentimes underwater
Mm-hmm.
and need help in making proper decisions. I think ultimately whether it's utilized through Sifted or through another group or just doing it on your own, the value of going through that data and making better informed decisions is it makes you look like a rock star.
Yeah.
That's the benefit. That's the value. And that's the human element of that.
That goes back to what you were talking about with spreadsheets. The person that set up the spreadsheet and did those long formulas and used the the different elements that Excel gives you is suddenly the hero of the company until somebody learns that they can do it through somebody like yourselves now. And I love the advancement of these technologies. There's a whole lot of them, and it's hard to find your way through the crowd of people that are offering like elements, But you said earlier the data lake, right? That's kind of the I think that's the actual words you used. And I think about it when you started, it was probably a data puddle, right? And now it's a data lake.
Yeah,
But it's going very quickly. I mean, how quickly do we accumulate data over and over and over? And it's going to be a data ocean like tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's massive. There's a statistic, and I'll butcher it, but it's basically saying that 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 20 years. It's just because we're capturing it for the first time and we're identifying it. With that much data and with how rapidly the industry is changing, and I mean just transportation in general, is changing at a rapid pace. I mean, from pre-COVID to post-COVID to now kind of a normalization from COVID, the carrier and shipper momentum, that pendulum is swinging back and forth. Sometimes the carrier has that momentum, sometimes the shippers have that momentum. And knowing when to strike and what you should be able to focus on. It used to be, I think when you and I first started out in transportation, it was kind of like a set it and forget it situation. I would renegotiate my contracts maybe once every year, maybe once every 2 years or 3 years. But at the pace at which things are changing, not just the carriers are changing things, but your own business is changing, needing to stay on top of it more frequently and make small corrective action throughout multiple quarters is really needed versus, I would say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, the last couple of years of catastrophe on a whole bunch of different aspects of things, life and transportation, supply chain, tells you how dramatically the pendulum can swing. Before I was in transportation, I kind of didn't know anything about it. I just, was my stuff going to get there, right? That was kind of the question I and most people ask themselves. But over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of attention and focus on the supply chain in general. And the only way it's going to get better is the application of technologies to make it more efficient, period. It's just, I always tell people, I love the visual of the term supply chain because it's all these links, whatever ends you're talking about, there's a whole bunch of links in between. And there's two ways to make it stronger. Either you lessen the number of links to make the two ends closer to one another with strong links in between, or you look at the weak ones and say, how do we change that? How do we look at those pieces and do something about it differently? You talked about Excel earlier. I remember in the late 90s putting together my Excel sheets that I was so proud of and doing some things for some customers. The problem I was trying to solve then is still the same problem today.
Same thing.
It's crazy to me. It's crazy to me. So my recommendation to anybody, and one of the reasons I wanted you to be on today, is because these technologies, and I'm sure there are a lot of companies out there that are similar to what you do, different, maybe don't have as much, maybe have a different platform, a different way of going about things. But one way or another, small, large, medium, doesn't matter your company size, you need to have some way to apply these things outside of your own spreadsheet in your own head.
Yep, that's right. I couldn't have said it better. I think that's exactly correct. And those are the organizations that thrive and win. Those are the organizations that are nimble enough to stay, I would say, flexible. You mentioned that supply chain kind of visualization. What makes a company great, especially when they have product that is being shipped in and shipped out, is flexibility within that chain. So I think of it as almost the companies that are winning, they're not steel chained. It's an elastic chain that are still strong and that it can grow and shrink depending upon that business and their needs. That flexibility, you only can really achieve that through corrective action using technology and using data, in my opinion. But those are the companies that are really thriving. It's really a kind of a cool time, honestly.
That's an interesting way to visualize that. I hadn't thought of that. I always, growing up on a farm back in Michigan, I'm always thinking of,
Yeah,
different kind of
it's the
chain,
chain.
right? But that
Yeah.
whole, flexibility thing has been not absent from our industry, but definitely centered around only a few companies, and it needs to be disseminated amongst a bunch of more of them, because the supply chain in general is not going to get any less volatile. It's just not. The infrastructure is changing. The players are changing. There's all kinds of things always changing. Who knows when the next ship gets stuck in the Suez Canal, for God's sakes? Who knows?
I
Or
know. I know. I
plane,
know.
some kind of planes, get grounded for a while for whatever. All this thing is very, very disruptive, and you got to have high-end professionals looking at this data and understanding how to change direction and be very nimble. Nimble logistics is the way I like to always put it.
Yep.
But that visualization
Yeah.
of, I'm almost visualizing a bungee cord as part of that.
Yeah.
I hate to do that because you don't want to be
I think
Gumby,
it's
but
a great.
yeah. But no, I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. And your focus a lot of the time is on the LTL and the last mile and the parcel and all that. And over the course of the last couple of years, that has exploded. You could see it coming a mile away, but when everybody's shut in their house for a while, it's exploded. So kind of the last thing I wanted to ask you about is, where do you see this going? I mean, things have kind of normalized in a way, as you mentioned, but people aren't racing
Yeah.
back to the malls, maybe to go to a movie, but they're not racing back to the malls other
Yeah.
than, there's some things you want to go and touch and feel before you buy. But even people are moving further and further away from that. They're looking at the Amazons and others out there and saying, I just want it and I want it now and as quickly as possible. And if somebody needs to drone it to my front door, they can. All that is data specific stuff.
That's a great question. What we're seeing, what the data lake, our group of data is telling us, is that there is not this major economic crisis, at least that we're facing and going through right now. It is a normalization from COVID. You had 15+% growth in 2018, 2019, and it exploded in 2020 because of COVID. It's now adjusting back, and it's still at that clip of a 15 to 20% growth over what it was before. E-commerce will continue to just expand and boom, but not at the pace that we saw over the last 2 or 3 years. And I think that is a healthy thing, because ultimately that extra number of shipments, extra packages has led for the carriers to really kind of muscle their way in and say, this is not a customer world anymore. This is a shipper world. We're inundated with freight, so we can be picky and choosy, and we don't need to negotiate. Ultimately, it's now swinging back into the customer's direction, and I think that's super healthy. I also see that Amazon is potentially going to make a play with FedEx or UPS in doing final mile delivery, not necessarily just when you buy product on Amazon, but I do believe there will be a day where you can ship with Amazon in their network and not have anything sold on their website, and use them similar to how you're using any other final mile carrier today, like FedEx or UPS or the post office. And ultimately, you've got a lot of data in those links that we're talking about, connecting them all together to give a holistic view, whether it's pre-shipment or post-shipment, or even at time of order of raw goods. Linking all of that so you have a full visual, I think, is going to be the future.
Yeah, I can agree with you that looking at this term normalization is hard for most people to do because they see such spikes in things. And then when you're coming off of that, you get this feeling that you're going into a well, so, and of course, I think you said at the very beginning of our discussion, maybe on air, maybe off air, but that the data amount that transportation logistics puts into your current lake is only second to maybe the banking industry, the finance industry.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are kind of converging in that nature, because at the end of the day, whatever service or product you're selling or buying, it's all about, moving dollars and cents around. But I can't thank you enough for coming on for a few minutes today to talk about this, a little bit about your company. And the last thing I would ask is, how do people that are watching this or listening to this get a hold of you and your company? where would you best like them to find your resources?
You can check out some of our visualizations and the way that we kind of build these turnkey models at sifted.com. It's just spelled exactly how it sounds, SIFTED.com. I'm also on LinkedIn and pretty active there, and they can reach out to me just under Caleb Nelson with Sifted. Be happy to connect.
That's fantastic, and we'll definitely put something in the show notes about that as well. But again, I can't thank you enough. I really appreciate you for coming aboard the Chris Joslyn Show today, and I look forward to our next conversation. I think visualizations and managing data has got to be one of the top couple of 3 priorities for companies in the transportation logistics space today. And if you're not, you're going to get left behind.
Well, thanks for having me on, Chris. Really appreciate it.